Ahlan wa sahlan fikum. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to continue our discussion from last time where we were talking about Form 1 verbs and we talked about the present tense. Today we want to talk about the past tense, and I'm also going to introduce you to the type B roots. Again, this is the typology that I'm kind of using for the sake of simplicity. So last time we talked about the type A roots where you have verbs with all three letters in the root, and today we're going to talk also about the ones that are missing the last letter of the root. But first, we're just going to go quickly through the past tense conjugations so that you have them here and you're familiar with them. They're very simple. That's why I think that we can do it fairly quick. It's going to be very similar to Fusha for those of you who are familiar with it. But even if you're not, it's pretty much straightforward. The first thing that you have to know is that the standard form of verbs that you already see, that's kind of like the infinitive, like if I say masak or katab or whatever, these are already the third person past tense forms. So you already basically know one of the forms because that already means he, so huwa masak, so he was holding something. That already has that meaning. One small thing to know is that the last letter of, say, masak, katab, etc., it doesn't have the fatha as it does in Fusha. So for those of you who have done Fusha, it's not like kataba or masaka or anything like that. Actually, it's always going to be missing that last vowel. That's never going to be there. Now, for a lot of the forms, basically there's two things that you need to know. A lot of them are just going to take a T at the end, and then for plural, as usual, we're going to add waw. And then for the feminine, we're going to add ya. So let's just go through it with the example of masak. So ana masakt. So here, the last two letters have sukun. So normally in Fusha, the last letter of the root would have sukun, but then the ana, it would be like masaktu. But all of that goes out the window. In Ammiya, the last letter of basically any word is always going to have sukun, like that. All those case endings and all that stuff, that all goes out the window. So again, it's masakt, just like that. Now for enta, it's also masakt. There's no difference actually, neither in the spelling or in the pronunciation. That's just something to be aware of. Now for enti, mostly it's spelled the same. You could add a ya at the end. In any case, even if you spell it without the ya, it is pronounced with a little bit of an I at the end. So it's masakti. That's the only difference. So ana masakt, enta masakt, enti masakti. Again, huwa masak, just like that. Now for hiya, there is a little bit of a different thing going on here. You might be a little bit alerted to that if you have done Fusha before. What we're going to do is that instead of having the first two letters with the vowels, so masakt, so first two letter with the vowels and then sukun sukun, what we're going to do is that the second letter of the whole root is going to have the sukun, and then the last letter is going to take fatha. So here's a few examples. Instead of masakt, it's going to be maskat. Do you see? So it's like two equal syllables where it's maskat or fihmat. So here, even though normally this is fihim, so with two fatha, the hiya form, her, is always going to have that fatha for the last letter of the root. So it's going to be maskat, kasrat, fihmat, katbat, etc., etc. It's always going to be like that. Now for the plural ones, for us it's just na, as it is in Fusha. So for example, kasarna, masakna, katabna, etc., etc. That's pretty simple. Now for entu and for homme, so the plural forms of you and for them, all you do is you add the waw to whatever the singular would be. So instead of masakt, it's masaktu. And instead of just masak, it's masaku. So again, masakt, masakt, masakti, masak, maskat, masakna, masaktu, and masaku. That's it. So it's pretty straightforward, right? Now the other half of this video is going to be about the B-type roots and what that looks like both in the present and the past. So let's do a little bit of a review of the A roots. So the A roots are just the ones that have all the letters, right? So kataba, right? Basically, there's two main ways that you can see this expressed in Form 1, in the present, the past, etc. You can have verbs that in the past tense are fatha fatha, or you can have verbs that in the past tense are kasra kasra. So an example of what I call an A1 verb is something like masak or kasar, etc., etc. They just have fatha fatha. The other would be the opposite, kasra kasra. So for example, fihim, ribih, etc. Now in the present tense, what happens is that the vowel gets inverted. So it's the other vowel. So instead of having like masak, so fatha fatha, in the present, that fatha changes to a kasra. So huwa masak, but in the present, it's huwa bimsik, right? Or ana bamsik, or anta btimsik. But it's always the kasra instead of the fatha. And then for the A2 verbs, so for something like ribih, in the present tense, that would be birbah, huwa birbah, or ana barbah, etc. So that's the only thing to know, is that in the past tense, in the present tense, you flip them, and then you have A1, which is fatha fatha, and then you have A2, which is kasra kasra. Now, of course, I mentioned in the last video that you have a few little exceptions. So there's the general A1 category, which is fatha fatha verbs. But the thing is that in the present, unfortunately, there are times where it's not flipped, and instead of having something like bamsik, you have bamzah for mazah, or you have baktob for katab. The only difference here is that you have three possibilities where in the present you'll either have kasra, which is the true A1, which is the inverted, or you can have fatha or dhamma. So I just call those AA or AW. None of that is really like, I mean, that's great, and that's in the last video, but for today I don't want to focus on that. It's not too important, because today we're going to talk about B1 and B2. So these are verbs that are missing the last letter of the root again. And there's no other exceptions like with the A1 and AA and whatever. None of that applies. So here you just have B1 and B2, and that's it. Now, what does this look like? Well, imagine that you have something like masak, right? Now imagine that you're missing the last letter of the root, and it's just masa. Basically, to get the shape of B1 or the shape of B2, you just have the shape of A1 and the shape of A2, and you literally just remove the last letter, and you extend the last vowel with either alif maksura or ya. So for example, masak, hypothetically, if we were going to turn this into a B verb, which is not like technically, you don't switch between them, because really it's a matter of what are the letters in the root. So it's not like you're really going to do this, but you'll see why I'm doing this right now. If you have something like masak, and you take away the ka, and you just have masa, well now, because the last letter is fatha, let's extend that with an alif maksura, which is an A sound. So you get masa just like that, right? Okay, what does that look like? Well, it looks a little bit like something that I've seen before, which is masha. So masha means to walk, and masha is a B1 verb. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that it's missing the last letter, but it's like an A1 verb because it's fatha fatha. It's just that the last letter is missing, so the second fatha gets extended as an alif maksura. So guess what happens in the present tense? Well, in the present tense, as is usual, as I mentioned before, you flip the vowel. So what happens if you flip an alif maksura into an I sound? Well, you get a ya. So whereas in the past tense, it's huwa masha with alif maksura, in the present tense, you get huwa bimshi, right? So now the alif maksura turned into a ya. And this is true across the board. So this is true for B1 verbs, but it's also true for B2 verbs. Okay, so what could a B2 verb mean? Well, it's an A2 verb, so let's imagine fihim. What happens if I take away the last letter? I just get fihi, right? This is not a verb or anything. But if I were to extend that and add a ya, well, now I have a shape that applies for many verbs. Now, a verb that actually follows this shape is nisi. Nisi means to forget, and as you can see, it's kasra kasra, but because it's missing the last letter of the root, the second kasra just gets sort of extended. I don't know if it's a spelling thing or whatever, but in any case, it gets extended with this ya. Now, what happens if I put this in the present tense? Well, again, you flip. So whereas it's huwa nisi in the past tense, huwa in the present tense, huwa binsa. So that became an alif maksura. So really it's just a matter of flipping between alif maksura and yeah. And really you get used to it after a while. I mean, the cool thing is that there's no exceptions or anything for this. So if you ever see a verb like this, where it's missing the last letter, just by seeing if it's alif maksura or yeah, you can know already what it's going to be in the present tense. So I think that's pretty cool because there's really no guesswork or anything like that. So you can automatically know. Okay, let's do all the conjugations with these two examples, just so you can see what it all looks like. So for masha, so in the present tense, it's ana bamshi, anta bitimshi, hiya bitimshi. So normally there would be an extra ya sound if you had something like bimsiki, for example. But here, because it's already ya, there's no change. You can't change that. So there's that. Now, huwa bimshi, hiya bitimshi, ehna mnimshi. Again, remember the M is preferable for us. Entu bitimshu. So here I added a waw, but the thing is that because the last letter here was a vowel already, so enta bitimshi, if I want to make it, I can't just add a waw after the ya or anything like that. I mean, I don't even know how that would sound. So it just replaces the last letter if it's alif maksura or ya. So it's bitimshu, and then homme bimshu. So instead of bimshi, bimshu. And the waw is always for the plural. So it's pretty straightforward. So for nisi, it's the same thing, basically. Again, you flip the vowel. So instead of nisi, it's ana bansa, enta btinsa, hiya btinsi. So here's the thing. You can't add another e to what's already an e. So if it's enta btimshi, it's for enti, it's also btimshi. But here, because it's an a sound, so here it's btinsa. For enti, it's btinsi, because here the e sound replaces the alif maksura, which you have for enta. So enti btinsi. Huwa binsa, hiya btinsa, ehna mninsa, entu btinsu, u homme binsu. Hek bas. It's pretty simple, I would say. Again, they pretty much follow the same pattern. There's just like the small thing with the enti, but it's pretty straightforward, and it looks, again, if you just apply the same rules as you would apply for the present tense for the verbs that we've already talked about, as long as you just make sure, just take note of how the waw replaces these vowels. I mean, really, it's more or less regular. That's why I say I don't call these irregular verbs per se. They just have different shapes, and so you just have to know a little bit how to adapt yourself to make it all work out. Now let's do the past tense for these, because there's a small thing that you need to be aware of. So for these verbs, with the alif maksura and the ya, what's important to know is that these, when you add a t at the end, as you normally do for the past tense, the ya and the alif become sort of extended in sound, and actually the alif maksura becomes a ya. Because if you know actually about Arabic spelling, usually if you have alif maksura and you add something to it, it becomes a ya. So, and then the ya is already a ya. So what happens is that if I have a verb like masha, for ana in the past tense, when I just add a t, it becomes mashet. So mashet, you extend this this ya sound, right? And in fact, it becomes kind of like an e, right? So ana mashet, enta mashet, enti masheti, huwa masha. Now hiya, again, a little bit different. So as we said before, for hiya, the pattern is not like masakt, but instead maskat, with a sukoon in the middle of the word, so to speak, in the middle of the root. But the thing is, if I give you a verb like masha, it already ends with a, so, I mean, it wouldn't make sense if I said mash. I mean, that would, in fact, that would be hamza, basically. So there's really no way to do this. So basically, nothing happens. I mean, it just becomes mashat, right? So instead of mashet, instead of it getting extended with the t, instead the sort of the alif maksura just gets kind of thrown onto the second letter. So instead of the second letter having sukoon, like in maskat, you just kind of throw it onto the second letter and you have mashat, just like that. Now for ehna, so mashena, entu mashetu, uhomme mashu. because again, the waw replaces the ya. So هم مشوا. Now, nisi, again, very similar. أنا نسيت, أنت نسيت, أنتِ نسيتي, هو نسي. هي, again, too bad for hiya. She keeps kind of giving us a bit of trouble. But the thing here is that alif cannot be a vowel, but ya can actually be a vowel. So if you have nisi, well, the same rule applies as it normally does for hiya, where the second letter has sukun and the third letter has the fatha. So in this case, the ya takes fatha to give you a ya sound instead of just e, right? So instead of being a vowel, it kind of actually becomes a consonant. I guess that's what happens. So in this case, it's nisyat, right? It's a bit strange, but yeah, that's what happens. So here there's an important difference between mashet, mashat, and nisayet, nisyat. It is a bit tricky, but that's how it is for hiya. إحنا نسينا, أنتوا نسيتوا, وهم نسوا. And that's it. That's all I had to talk about today. Again, we did the past tense for the A roots, the form 1, and then I explained a little bit about the B type roots, the ones that are missing the last letter, how those are related between A1 and B1, and then A2 and B2. And then lastly, we did the past tense for these B type verbs, just noticing the slight differences, the slight things that you should be aware of and adapt to. But that's pretty much it. I don't think it's too complicated. Again, as usual, if you have a question, drop it in the comments. I'll try to answer. And next time we're going to talk about the imperative. I'll see you then.